Good afternoon. Welcome to Lake City Live. I am Aniruddh. With me, I have my co host Anisha. Today, we have with us an eminent senior advocate, a prominent politician, and a great academician, Mr. Salman Khurshid, sir. Welcome to the show, sir. So, my first question to you is from the first day of your practice to becoming a senior advocate, how was your experience, sir, and how would you describe this journey?
Well, to tell you truthfully, I've had many breaks in between. I came back in the early 80s and registered at the Bar Council, and I began practice with a very famous chamber in the Supreme Court. It had it's produced at least two Supreme Court judges, that chamber, and top lawyers like Mr. R.K. Garg, lawyers like Mr. D.P. Singh, who also became a Rajya Sabha MP. Series of other people, if you start counting them, it sounds in a very impressive list. Margaret Alva was a member of that chamber. Tarun Gogoi was a member of that chamber. As I said, two Supreme Court judges. So that's where I started, which is, in a sense, starting in the top, because I never went through what I believe is necessary training by spending some time in trial court and high court and then coming to the Supreme Court. So I went into the deep end, as it were, right in the beginning, and I would sit in on briefings. I would make suggestions as to what we could. I was coming from an academic world, so for me the suggestions were largely academic, but gradually one got a feel of what the court was like, etc. I appeared in some matters on my own when I had some matters to argue. But then I got sucked into politics and I got elected, I got pulled out of law. I spent 5 years in Parliament. I came back to law again, barely for a year or two, and then I was sent off to UP as the head of the party in UP, and then got elected again. So frankly, I've not had a smooth run, as it were, that any lawyer normally would have. And so it's been in fits and starts, and if at all there's been sustained, serious practice, it's been since I left government last time. So we're barely 3 years into it. But somewhere along the line, because of my appearances, because of my writings and my academic background, the Supreme Court was kind enough to make me a senior counsel, and that's a good fun. That's good fun to be a senior counsel.
So my next question to you is, what is the most interesting legal issue you dealt with in your career, and which became a turning point for you to be listed among the top lawyers of the country?
That's when you frankly look back, there are many issues that appear like they should have been very important, but not every issue that is important actually finally grows into a big case. I guess the most challenging case that I've argued, which I got to argue myself, that I wasn't assisting anyone, was a death sentence matter that came from Gujarat. This is long before Gujarat had the more recent riots and trouble. There were sporadic riots in Gujarat, and there was a case from Ahmedabad where 6 or 7 people were on the death row for good 5 or 6 years, and we appeared in the Supreme Court for them. And not only were they not awarded death sentence, they were in fact acquitted because of the manner in which the evidence had been given about people having seen them in a crowd of 5,000 people. And we were able to turn that around. And that I thought was a very important moment in my career, where something that stares you in the face as virtually a foregone conclusion, convicted by a trial court, then that conviction upheld by the High Court, 6 years in the death row, and then you argue on essentially a simple point, you're able to turn it around. There was another case that I argued, and that was again against death sentence. I remember Chief Justice Pathak was hearing it along with other judges, where I argued that, not because I actually believe that to be so, but I argued that it's much better to take one sense of a criminal, convict, rather than 5 senses. When you kill a person, when you execute a person, you take away 5 senses. And I said to the court that you leave 4 senses intact and take away 1, which is your eyes, and contribute that to society for someone else to be able to see. Of course, it was rejected, but it was recognized that this is a forceful argument and that Parliament should consider it. And somebody said to me, it sounds awful that you're saying somebody's eyes should be surgically removed. And I said, I'm not saying that you surgically remove the eyes. I'm trying to make you understand that killing a person is much worse. And therefore, this is an argument against death sentence. But as you know, death sentence still remains a valid sentence, although in very rare cases. And I guess sometimes in future, this matter will be argued again.
Okay.
So my next question to you is, as an eminent academician, you have taught in the Trinity College, Oxford. What is the major difference that you find in the Indian universities as compared to that in England?
Numbers. I was taught my law sitting with one tutor and at best another 2 students, so 3 of us and 1 tutor. And that was enough to teach me law. There were some lectures also that you had a choice. You could opt out and opt in or opt out depending on which subject was of special interest to you. Those lectures were held in the university. You were given a schedule at the beginning of term, and you could pick any lecture that you wanted to go. But you could actually get by without going to any lecture at all, just by the fact that 1 tutor and 3 students together would be taught. Now that's something that is too much of a luxury in our Indian circumstances, because there are too many people and it would be too expensive to have a system that you would follow the Oxford tutorial system in. And that makes a world of difference, that your personal rapport with your teacher, 3 or 4 teachers, teaching you different subjects. The other important thing, of course, is that I was lucky to go to an Oxford like university, that you had the best minds there, and you were trying to match up with the best minds, which really pushes you to the edge of endeavor, which is not always the case here. We have some very good teachers in Indian universities, but again, as I said, there's so many that they get lost amongst, say, 100 or 50 or 60. Whereas there you're dealing with people who stand out, 4, 5, 6, 7, and you get ambitious and you get inspired that, I want to be like this man, and that's when you produce your best work. Many people inspired by that stay back and become teachers themselves, which is now beginning to happen in India. Otherwise, the best people go into practice here, there, everywhere. But there is something special about how academics are treated in the system in the UK and in America. And I suppose the same happens in other countries like France and Germany. But I guess that kind of stature is not given to academics in our country. Students give them respect, students give them affection, but for the system as a whole to give respect, I don't know of many practicing lawyers who ever pause to ask an academic whether he has any or she has any suggestions to make in their field. But there's much greater interaction in the systems abroad.
So my next question to you is, what is more prominent of your image as a lawyer or as a politician?
That you've got to tell me. I have. It was obviously a challenge when I came back after 5 years in government. I came back to practice. Many people had grown in stature over the 5 years. There were many new faces, many new lawyers. Many judges had changed. Of course, I had been law minister, so I knew a lot of judges, having worked with the courts and having worked with the system. But in the beginning, I had to work harder to convince people that this was not just a hobby, that this was a profession, that if I came to the profession, I have come to stay, and that it wouldn't be that every time they have a critical or crucial hearing, I will be off making a speech somewhere. That meant that I had to sacrifice a little bit of my politics, but you got to find the right balance, and I guess there will be moments when I'll need to pull out a bit, when state elections happen and I have to find time to go away. With great reluctance, I do so for 10 days, 12 days, 15 days or whatever. And I know that I'm missed for those days, but you have to find a balance.
So moving on to my next question, what is the one major difference that you have observed in the lawyers of your generation as compared to the lawyers of the current generation?
Gosh, there's much more aggression, there's much more aggravation. I would think that the greater sleight of hand. There was, I think the generation that I learned from was far more self-assured and honorable, where the highest, the best practices and highest traditions of the bar were taken very, very seriously. So in that sense, like many other Indian institutions, there's been what you call democratization, that it's spread into a much larger group, and therefore you have much greater variety and less rigorous compliance with the best practices, etc. But then there are some people who are absolutely outstanding, who live up to the highest traditions. But I think it's a slightly changed picture from the times when I first came into practice.
So moving on to my next question, what is your opinion about the debate which is going on right to privacy?
Well, I'm surprised that we need to debate it. I mean, I think there's enough law, enough jurisprudence in India that privacy is part of the larger concept of Article 21, and life without dignity is no life at all, and dignity without privacy is no dignity at all. So I would be surprised that I would be very surprised that this needs to be debated. Ultimately, I think that the Supreme Court will uphold it. Of course, they are talking about qualifications and that it can't be unqualified, it can't be absolute. But then that's true about any right. I mean, I think arguing about that it can't be absolute is, again, a futile argument. Of course, everyone knows that it can't be absolute. It has to be coordinated with and balanced with other rights that other people have. So you kill someone and then go and say you intrude into my private life to ask me questions is wrong. Now, certainly not, because the person's right to life has been violated, and therefore there has to be some accommodation in order to ensure that that person gets justice. So I don't think that debate is a very useful debate, but let's see what the judgment is finally.
So you are one of the most renowned academicians of the country. So what will be your piece of advice for those law students who want to get into academics after law school?
Well, I wish I had the courage and conviction of my courage to actually stay in academics. Academics is, I think, a very noble pursuit, and you'll waste a lot of time in practice, a lot of time that could be used productively is not used productively in practice, because you have to wait your turn for the cases to be called. There are delays, there are adjournments, etc., etc. And in academics, you can use every moment productively. But on the other hand, there are limits to what you can do in academics, and particularly in India, and there are limits to your ability to influence life around yourself, except of course the influence that you have on students and generations of students who go through you. So I would think that if anyone has an aspiration to be an academic, I would certainly applaud them, I would certainly encourage them, and I would certainly want to see them as academics.
So my next question is, if you are given as a law minister of a country today as an opportunity, then what major reform you will like to introduce it in today's scenario?
I think there's a scope for many reforms, but one particular reform I think is in legal aid. We seem to associate legal aid largely with criminal law, and legal aid is also largely dependent on lawyers who don't have briefs, so you give them briefs, etc. I think the legal aid system must address both criminal law as well as civil law more extensively, and there should be the top lawyers, particularly say lawyers coming out of universities like yours, who should be offered 3 years assignment to work as full-time lawyers with the legal aid committees, supervised of course by other people who've had more experience at the bar and who are also willing to come in to work for a year or two. And then after 3 years you could be given an option of extending it by another 2 years or moving back to private practice. But I think the legal aid reform is very important. If we believe in right to life, right to food, right to education, right to information, right to justice, I think we have a right. We should have a right to legal assistance. I think that's the next big right that I would want to bring about.
Sir, you have been the Minister of Law and Justice as well as the Minister of Minority Affairs. According to you, are the laws of the land well equipped to safeguard the interests of the minorities, or do they need further improvement?
Yes, by and large, yes. By and large, yes. See, there are two kinds of dimensions involved. One is to prevent harm coming to the minority, and I think there are ample laws for that. The other one is what we call reverse discrimination or affirmative action, where laws assist you to be able to achieve something that you would not otherwise achieve. And that's really the whole debate about reservations, affirmative action, quota systems. There I think that there are some issues and some problems, and minorities may have a claim for a little more or much more than we've been able to guarantee them under the present law, because we were clear that there could be no reservations in our constitution, reservations based on religion, but we were equally clear there'd be no reservation based on caste. But when you convert caste into a class, surely you can convert religion into a class. But this debate has been frustrated because there hasn't been an honest application of mind to this. And I think affirmative action is the next big thing. I felt myself that the way to address it is through an Equal Opportunity Commission, which is next generation affirmative action, not like reservations, but more flexible and more far-reaching. But unfortunately, when we were in government, we couldn't develop adequate consensus for it. So hopefully, sometimes in future, we'll do it.
So, what advice you would like to give to the budding lawyers?
Oh gosh, be yourself to begin with, work hard, have clarity of mind, develop concepts of need, justice, fairness, equity, and try to apply them in your professional life so that you are a cut above an average lawyer. Don't treat law as a business, treat it as a profession, and that distinction is very important.
Today we had Mr. Salman Khurshid sir. Thank you and keep watching Lake City Live.